Your soulmate truly loves you, but one unexpected detail about you has them completely conflicted. Don't scroll away yet, because the detail that has your soulmate conflicted is not another person, not a secret relationship, and not something wrong with you. In this fictional soulmate story, the person you love has already admitted to themselves that their feelings are real. They think about you when they wake up. They replay conversations after they end. They notice when your energy changes. They miss you when you become quiet. And yet there is one thing about you that keeps making them step forward and then suddenly pull back. One unexpected detail that makes them want you more while also frightening them enough to question whether they are ready for someone like you. Stay with me, because once you understand what that detail is, their recent distance may start making a completely different kind of sense. Your soulmate has been trying to understand why you affect them so deeply. They told themselves maybe it was chemistry. Maybe timing. Maybe attraction. Maybe because you appeared during a vulnerable chapter in their life. But every explanation felt incomplete. Then something happened recently. A conversation. A small moment. Nothing dramatic. You said something they were not expecting. Maybe they were complaining about another person, a problem, or a situation where they felt misunderstood. They expected you to automatically agree with them. Most people do. They expected reassurance. Instead, you gently said something like, "I understand why you feel that way, but I also think you're avoiding your part in it." Your soulmate froze. Not because you were cruel. You were calm. You were respectful. But you did something almost nobody around them does anymore. You told them the truth without trying to impress them. That stayed with them. For hours afterward, they replayed the conversation. At first, maybe they were irritated. Why couldn't they just support me? But the longer they thought, the more uncomfortable the real answer became: you had supported them. Just not their ego. And that is the unexpected detail about you that has them conflicted. You see them too clearly. Not magically. Not perfectly. But clearly enough that their usual defenses do not work as well around you. You notice when they are pretending not to care. You notice when they are being stubborn. You notice when they use humor to escape vulnerability. You notice when they say, "I'm fine," but something in their behavior says otherwise. And maybe most frightening of all, you do not seem interested in worshipping an idealized version of them. You want the real person. That sounds romantic, but for your soulmate, it is terrifying. Because the real person has flaws. The real person gets insecure. The real person sometimes becomes jealous. Sometimes selfish. Sometimes quiet when they should communicate. Sometimes afraid of being abandoned. Sometimes afraid of being chosen because being chosen creates something they could lose. They have spent years learning how to control what other people see. They show competence, confidence, humor, strength, maybe independence. But around you, the performance becomes harder to maintain. And somewhere inside, your soulmate keeps asking, what happens if they see everything? That question has become the conflict. Their heart says, let them in. Their fear says, not yet. Their heart says, "This is the person you have been looking for." Their fear answers, "Exactly." That's why they're dangerous. Because losing a casual connection hurts for a while. Losing someone who truly knows you can hurt much deeper. Your soulmate has experienced enough disappointment to know that intimacy creates vulnerability. Maybe someone once learned their weaknesses and used them during arguments. Maybe they opened up and later regretted it. Maybe they trusted someone who eventually walked away. Whatever happened, they learned a lesson: if people know less, they can hurt you less. Then you arrived and made that strategy difficult. You do not pressure them to reveal everything. That would actually be easier to resist. Instead, you create moments where they want to tell you. That is what scares them. Maybe one night they almost told you something about their past they rarely discuss. They started a sentence, stopped, then laughed and changed the subject. You noticed, but you did not push. You simply said, "You can tell me when you're ready." That sentence affected them more than you realized. Because you gave them freedom. And freedom can feel more intimate than pressure. They went home thinking, "Why do I want to tell them?" They did not have an answer. The next time you spoke, they became slightly more distant. You may have thought the closeness had frightened them away. In a sense, it had. But not because they disliked it. Because they liked it too much. This is where the conflict becomes even deeper. Your soulmate does not only fear you seeing their flaws. They fear you seeing their potential. You seem to notice the version of them they have been avoiding becoming. The more emotionally honest version. The version who stops blaming timing. The version who communicates instead of disappearing. The version who takes responsibility instead of hiding behind old wounds. And sometimes being loved by someone who sees your potential can feel uncomfortable because it removes excuses. Around people who expect little from you, you can remain the same forever. Around someone who sees what you could become, you become aware of where you are choosing not to grow. Your soulmate feels that around you. Maybe you never lecture them. Maybe you never say, "You need to change." You simply have standards. If something hurts you, you say it. If they become inconsistent, you notice. If they treat you well, you appreciate it. If they repeatedly create confusion, you step back. That last part has them especially conflicted. Because you love deeply, but you are not willing to abandon yourself to prove love. Your soulmate has noticed. They may have tested the connection without realizing they were testing it. Pulled away slightly to see if you chased. You did not. Became quieter to see if you panicked. You gave them space. Maybe they expected you to keep proving your interest. Instead, you continued living your life. And your soulmate suddenly understood something: you could love them and still leave if the relationship became unhealthy. That frightened them more than someone who obviously did not care. Because with you, love is not possession. It is choice. And choice has to be renewed through behavior. Your soulmate cannot simply assume that because you care today, you will tolerate anything tomorrow. They respect that about you. They are also terrified by it. If you're enjoying this fictional soulmate-style emotional story, subscribe and stay close, because the next thing your soulmate realizes about you is the detail that sends their conflict into overdrive. They discover that the trait they thought made you difficult to love is actually the exact reason they cannot imagine replacing you. Recently, your soulmate may have spoken to someone they trust. A friend. Maybe they finally admitted, "I don't understand them." The friend asked, "What don't you understand?" Your soulmate said, "They care, but they don't chase." The friend laughed. Why is that confusing? Your soulmate became irritated. Because sometimes I don't know whether they still want me. The friend replied, "Have you asked?" Silence. Of course they had not. Asking would require vulnerability. Instead, your soulmate had been trying to read your behavior like a puzzle. The friend said, "Maybe they're waiting for you to communicate instead of making them prove themselves." That sentence stayed. Your soulmate realized that the thing making you unpredictable to them was not inconsistency. It was self-respect. You did not respond to emotional distance by becoming desperate. You responded by protecting your peace. And your soulmate had been misreading that as lack of feeling. They started remembering moments when you clearly cared. The message you sent after a difficult day. The detail you remembered months later. The way you looked at them when they were speaking honestly. The time you quietly defended them when someone misunderstood them. You had shown love. Maybe not with dramatic declarations, but through attention. Yet whenever they failed to meet you halfway, you did not chase harder. You stepped back. That is where their fear began whispering, they could leave. But another part of them answered, that means if they stay, they are choosing you. That changed everything. Because your soulmate has been surrounded by people who stay for complicated reasons. Habit. Convenience. Dependence. Fear. Loneliness. With you, they sense something different. You could survive without them. And therefore, if you choose them, it would actually mean something. That makes your love more valuable in their mind, not less. But it also makes them feel the pressure of responsibility. They cannot take you for granted. They cannot assume silence will always be forgiven. They cannot keep offering half clarity while expecting full loyalty. And that is exactly why they are conflicted. They want you. But wanting you means changing the way they approach love. Recently, they started thinking about the future. Not some dramatic fantasy. Ordinary things. What would it be like to have you around on a difficult morning? What would it be like to argue with you and actually have to repair instead of disappear? What would it feel like to let you see them exhausted, insecure, not impressive? Those thoughts created warmth and fear at the same time. Because your soulmate knows that a future with you would not allow them to remain emotionally hidden forever. Eventually, you would notice the things they avoid. Eventually, they would have to tell you why certain situations trigger them. Eventually, they would need to ask for reassurance instead of creating distance and hoping you understood. That is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar peace can feel frightening to someone who is used to emotional chaos. Your soulmate may have had relationships where love was dramatic. Intense highs. Painful lows. Constant uncertainty. They became accustomed to confusing adrenaline with passion. Then you came along and showed them something quieter. A connection that could feel warm without being unstable. And strangely, peace made them suspicious. They thought, why doesn't this feel like the relationships I'm used to? Maybe because those relationships trained their nervous system to expect chaos. You feel different. And different can initially feel wrong even when it is healthier. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that now. They are realizing that the unexpected detail about you is not one isolated trait. It is the combination of emotional depth and boundaries. You can see them, but you do not try to control them. You can love them, but you do not abandon yourself. You can forgive, but you do not forget patterns. You can be patient, but patience is not endless access. And that combination is forcing your soulmate to make a decision. Do they want the kind of love they always say they want badly enough to become emotionally available for it? That question has been haunting them. One night recently, they opened your conversation. They stared at your name for several minutes. They almost wrote, "Are we okay?" Deleted. Too vague. Then, "Have you been pulling away?" Deleted. That would make the conversation about your behavior instead of theirs. Finally, they typed something more honest. "I think I've been acting strange because I'm scared of how much you can see through me." They stared at it. Their heart raced. Then they deleted it too. Not ready. But the sentence stayed inside them. The next day, they spoke to that same friend. "I almost told them." The friend asked, "Why didn't you?" Your soulmate answered, "Because what if they ask what I'm scared of?" The friend replied, "Then tell them. You make everything sound easy. It's not easy. It's just simple." That irritated your soulmate because again, it was true. The truth might be simple. "I love you, and being known by you scares me." The consequences were complicated. Your soulmate asked their friend, "What if they see everything and realize I'm not who they thought?" The friend answered, "What if they already see more than you think and they're still there?" Silence. That question followed your soulmate home. Maybe you already knew they were imperfect. Of course. Maybe you were not waiting for some flawless version. Maybe the person you loved was the messy, unfinished one. And that possibility created a new kind of fear. What if they have been running from acceptance, not rejection? What if you are actually capable of loving them where they are while still expecting them to grow? That is much harder to escape. Because then the problem is no longer whether you are safe. It becomes whether they are willing to risk receiving something safe. Your soulmate opened your chat again that night. This time, they typed, "Can I tell you something weird?" You answered a few minutes later, "Probably." They smiled. Then wrote, "Sometimes I think you understand me more than I'm comfortable with." You replied, "Is that bad?" They stared at the question. Finally, "I don't think so." Then, "I think it scares me." Your response came gently, "Why?" There it was. The question they had been afraid of. Your soulmate could run. Make a joke. Change the subject. Old pattern. Instead, they typed, because if you really know me and still care, then I don't know what excuse I have left to keep pulling away." You read that. Long silence. Your soulmate's heart started racing. Then you replied, "Maybe you don't need an excuse." That sentence hit. They stared. You continued, "Maybe you just need to decide what you want." There it was. The choice. Your soulmate asked, "And if I don't know?" You answered, "Then take your time. But don't ask me to live in confusion while you decide." Clear. Loving. Boundaried. Exactly you. Your soulmate felt both challenged and relieved. They wrote, "That's the thing about you." You asked, "What?" They replied, "You make it difficult to hide." You sent, "Good." They laughed. But the laugh turned into something more emotional because suddenly they understood. The detail about you that frightened them was also the detail they had been searching for. You made honesty harder to avoid. Not because you forced it. Because the connection itself made pretending exhausting. Your soulmate typed, "I think I love that about you." You stared at the message. Then asked, "Think?" They smiled. There it was again. The safe word. Think. They almost left it. Then deleted the word and rewrote the sentence, "I love that about you." Delivered. Small confession. But real. You replied, "That sounded difficult." They laughed. You have no idea. Then you sent something that changed their entire expression, "I do, actually." Your soulmate froze. "What do you mean?" You took several minutes. Then wrote, "Because there's something about you that has me conflicted too." Their hearts started racing. For months, your soulmate had assumed they were the only person struggling. The only one afraid. The only one trying to understand how deep this connection had become. Now you were saying there was something about them that frightened you too. "What?" they asked. You did not answer immediately. When the message finally came, it was not what your soulmate expected. You wrote, "You remind me of someone from my past." Everything inside your soulmate went still. Their first thought was immediate, an ex-someone who hurt you. Someone they might unknowingly resemble. Fear rushed back. "In what way?" they asked. You replied, "That's the complicated part." Another pause. "Some of the things that make me feel safest with you are the exact things that person used to show me before everything changed." Your soulmate stared at the words. Suddenly your boundaries, your caution, your ability to step back all made even more sense. You were not only protecting yourself from their inconsistency. Something about them was touching an old memory. And now, for the first time, your soulmate realized the conflict was mutual. They were afraid you could see them too clearly. You were afraid what you saw might eventually change into something you had survived before. And the next conversation between you would force both of you to decide whether this connection was truly different, or whether both hearts were simply recognizing old fears wearing new faces. The moment you told them, "You remind me of someone from my past," your soulmate felt everything inside them tighten, because suddenly the conflict they had been carrying no longer belonged only to them. They had spent so much time believing they were the one afraid of being seen, the one afraid of getting attached, the one pulling back because the connection felt too real, and now they were discovering that you had been carrying your own fear quietly on the other side. They stared at your message for a long time before answering because the first instinct was defensive, I'm not that person. But they stopped themselves. You had not actually accused them of being the same. You had said something more complicated. Some of the things that made you feel safest with them were the exact things someone from your past once showed you before everything changed. That meant the fear was not about who your soulmate was today. It was about what your heart remembered. So instead of defending themselves, your soulmate asked, "What happened?" You did not answer immediately. Maybe because this was not a story you told easily. Maybe because even after all this time, explaining it made you feel exposed. Finally you wrote, "They were good to me at first." Your soulmate felt something cold move through their chest. Of course. Most painful stories do not begin painfully. If the person had been obviously wrong from the beginning, leaving would have been easier. You continued, "They listened. They remembered things. They were consistent. They made me feel like I could relax." Your soulmate stared at those words because every description sounded dangerously familiar. Listening. Remembering. Consistency. The exact qualities you had praised in them. The exact things that had made you feel safe enough to care. Then you wrote, "And once I trusted them completely, everything started changing." Your soulmate stopped breathing for a second. They asked, "How?" You explained slowly. The consistency became unpredictable. Warmth became something you had to earn. Conversations that once felt safe started becoming places where your vulnerability was used against you. If you expressed fear, you were called insecure. If you asked for clarity, you were told you were creating problems. If you pulled back, they became loving again just long enough to make you question whether you had imagined the bad parts. Eventually you stopped trusting your own perception. Your soulmate read every word with a growing sense of discomfort because now they understood why their own occasional withdrawal had affected you more deeply than they realized. To them, pulling back after closeness meant fear. To you, it sometimes looked like the beginning of a pattern you had already survived. Your soulmate typed, "I'm sorry." You replied almost immediately, "You didn't do that to me." That distinction mattered. You were not blaming them for another person's actions. You continued, "But when you become warm and then suddenly distant, my brain remembers." There it was. The real conflict. Memory. Not logic. Not accusation. Your nervous system recognizing something familiar and preparing for pain before your mind had enough information. Your soulmate looked back at every time they had disappeared after a vulnerable conversation. Every delayed response meant only to create emotional space. Every moment they felt exposed and quietly stepped backward. They had assumed you would understand. But how could you, especially with a history like that? They wrote, "So when I pull away, you think I'm changing?" You answered, "Sometimes." Then another message, "I know that isn't always fair to you." Your soulmate froze slightly because you were taking responsibility too. You were not saying your past gave you permission to assume the worst forever. You continued, that's part of why I've been conflicted. I don't want to punish you for something someone else did. Your soulmate stared at that sentence for a long time. It mirrored one of their own deepest fears. They did not want to punish you for people who had hurt them either. And suddenly the connection looked different. Maybe both of you had been standing in front of each other with old alarms going off, each afraid the other would eventually become someone from the past. Your soulmate wrote, I think I've been doing the same thing. You replied, how? They took a breath. Every time you step back, I assume you're preparing to leave because someone before you did that. Silence. Then, so I pull back too. You read it. Your heart tightened because now the cycle became visible. You noticed their distance and became cautious. They noticed your caution and interpreted it as rejection. Their fear created more distance. Your fear created more protection. Two people accidentally confirming each other's worst expectations. You wrote, that explains a lot. Your soulmate almost laughed. Unfortunately. For the first time, maybe the tension softened because naming the pattern made it slightly less powerful. You were no longer trapped inside it without understanding. Now both of you could see it. Your soulmate asked, what did that person from your past do when you tried to talk about the changes? You hesitated. Then wrote, they made me feel crazy. That sentence hit hard. You explained that every time you pointed out inconsistency, they gave you explanations that made the problem sound like your perception. Maybe you were too sensitive. Too demanding. Too afraid. Eventually you started apologizing for asking questions that were actually reasonable. That experience taught you something important. You would never again stay indefinitely in a connection where your reality had to be constantly negotiated. That was why your boundaries became strong. That was why when something felt off now, you did not chase endlessly. You asked once or twice. Then you watched behavior. Your soulmate finally understood that your boundaries were not a lack of love. They were a response to what love had once cost you. You wrote, that's also why I sometimes go quiet instead of asking again. Your soulmate asked, because you think asking makes you weak? You paused. No. Because I've already learned that if someone wants to hide something, asking 10 times won't create honesty. That sentence stayed with them. They thought about every time you had asked, are you okay? Or, did something change? And they had answered with some vague version of, I'm fine. Maybe after the second or third time, you stopped asking. They had interpreted your silence as emotional withdrawal. But maybe it was something else. You had decided to let their actions speak because they were not giving you words you could trust. Your soulmate wrote, I think I've made you watch my behavior when I should have been communicating. You answered, sometimes. There was no need to exaggerate. Not always. But enough to matter. Your soulmate asked a difficult question, do I actually feel like them to you? You stared at the screen. You knew the answer had to be precise. No, their body relaxed slightly. Then you continued, but certain moments feel familiar. That was different. Like what? They asked. You answered, when you say something vulnerable and then act differently the next day. Your soulmate closed their eyes. Exactly. vulnerability hangover. Their old pattern. They would open up, feel exposed, then unconsciously create distance to restore control. To them, that distance meant, I need to feel safe again. To you, it looked like, I regret letting you close. That difference mattered enormously. You wrote, I'm not asking you to never need space. Another message. I need you to stop making me guess whether the space means you changed your mind. Your soulmate read that slowly. Then answered, I can do that. You replied, don't promise quickly. They stopped. You were right. Promises made inside emotional conversations are easy. Behavior later is harder. So they changed the sentence. I want to learn to do that. Better. More honest. You wrote, that feels real. If you're still with this fictional emotional story, subscribe and stay close, because this is where your soulmate finally understands that the thing about you making them conflicted is connected to the thing about them making you conflicted too. Both of you feel safe enough to imagine something real, but scared enough to mistake old memories for present danger. Your soulmate continued, can I tell you something uncomfortable? You replied, yes. They wrote, part of me has been waiting for you to prove you're different from people who left me. You stared at that. They continued before you could respond, and I think that's unfair. Your soulmate explained that sometimes they pulled away without realizing they were watching to see whether you would chase. If you did, they felt reassured. If you did not, they panicked. But that was not healthy. It turned their fear into a test you had never agreed to take. You wrote, I noticed. They almost laughed. Of course you did. You continued, that's one reason I stopped chasing. Your soulmate's chest tightened. Because you didn't care? No, then, because if I have to prove I won't leave every time you become afraid, we'll spend the whole relationship inside your fear. That sentence landed hard. But it was not cruel. It was true. Your soulmate had been asking you to repeatedly reassure a wound you did not create. You could support healing. You could not become endless proof that abandonment would never happen. No one can guarantee that. Your soulmate typed, so what would healthy reassurance look like? You thought carefully. If you're scared, tell me. I can respond to truth. Pause. I can't respond well to distance disguised as a test. That distinction changed everything. And what do you need from me, you asked. Your soulmate had to think too. Then. If something reminds you of your past, tell me before you decide I'm becoming that person. Your chest tightened. Fair. You had sometimes made decisions internally before giving them context. Your boundaries protected you, but if taken too far, they could become preemptive escape. You answered, I can work on that. Then you added, but if a pattern keeps repeating after we talk about it, I will still protect myself. Your soulmate replied, you should. That answer surprised you. Maybe months earlier they would have heard your boundary as a threat. Now they heard it as clarity. They did not want a relationship where you stayed regardless of how they behaved. They wanted to become someone whose behavior gave you reasons to stay freely. The conversation became quieter after that. Not less meaningful. softer. You both had said things that required time to settle. Then your soulmate asked, "What was the moment you realized I wasn't that person from your past?" You had not expected the question. You thought. There were several. But one stood out. A time when you disagreed with them. Maybe strongly. Your body had prepared for the old pattern: punishment, distance, silent treatment. Instead, your soulmate said, "I'm upset, but I don't want this disagreement to become a reason we stop talking." That sentence had stayed with you. It was small. But it showed something different. Conflict did not have to equal withdrawal. You told them. Your soulmate barely remembered saying it. That shocked them. Sometimes the moments that build trust are ordinary enough for one person to forget while the other carries them for months. They wrote, "I had no idea that mattered." You answered, "It did." Then they asked, "What was the moment that made you most afraid I might become like them?" Harder. You hesitated. Then told them. A night after a vulnerable conversation when your soulmate disappeared until the next afternoon. When they returned, they were casual, almost as though nothing important had happened. That moment made your stomach drop because it felt almost identical to the beginning of the old pattern. You did not confront them. You simply became quieter for several days. Your soulmate remembered now. They had been overwhelmed that night, not angry. They went quiet because they were embarrassed about what they had shared. They had no idea you interpreted it as withdrawal after intimacy. "I'm sorry," they wrote. Then, before over-explaining, "I understand why that felt familiar." You appreciated that. Then they explained what actually happened. Not to erase your reaction. To give context. "I got scared because I told you something I had never said to anyone." You replied, "I know that now. I should have said, I feel exposed and need a little time." You answered, "Exactly." There it was again. The thing underneath the thing. If they had named the fear, you would have understood. Instead, silence forced you to interpret. Your soulmate asked, "Would that really have made a difference?" You answered immediately, "Huge." They stared. One sentence. That was all. Sometimes relationships do not collapse because people have impossible needs. They collapse because nobody says the simplest sentence soon enough. Your soulmate felt regret, but also hope. Communication was learnable. Maybe this pattern did not require a miracle. It required practice. The next few days became a quiet experiment. Not some manipulative test. Both of you simply tried to behave differently. One evening, your soulmate became overwhelmed after a deep conversation. They felt the old urge to disappear. Instead they wrote, "I feel exposed right now, but I'm not regretting what I said. I might be quieter tonight." You read it and felt your body relax. "Thank you for telling me." That was it. No spiral. No fear. The next morning, they returned naturally. Another day, something in their tone reminded you of your past. Old instinct said withdraw immediately. Instead you wrote, "Your energy feels different. I'm noticing it's triggering an old fear, and I don't know if that's about you or me. Your soulmate answered, mostly work stress. Not you. Simple. Again, no 2-day misunderstanding. Both of you began realizing how much unnecessary pain had been created by assuming rather than asking. But change also revealed another truth. You were not only attracted because you triggered each other. In fact, the safer the connection became, the more clearly genuine affection remained. That mattered. Sometimes people mistake trauma activation for chemistry. But as the drama reduced, you still wanted to talk. Still laughed. Still missed each other. Still cared about ordinary details. The connection did not need chaos to feel alive. That surprised your soulmate especially. They had expected less fear to mean less intensity. Instead, less fear created more warmth. One night they admitted, I think I thought love had to feel unstable to feel important. You replied, why? They explained that in their past, the most intense relationships were the least predictable. Highs felt incredible because lows were so painful. Their nervous system learned to call relief love. With you, things were starting to feel different. Your soulmate wrote, sometimes peace feels almost boring. You laughed. Wow, romantic. They replied, wait. Then, but I think I'm learning boring can be beautiful. You smiled. They continued, knowing you'll answer honestly is quieter than wondering whether you'll disappear. But it feels better. You answered, that might be the nicest insult I've ever received. Both laughed. Humor became another sign of safety. But then came a moment neither of you could predict. Someone from your past contacted you. The person. The one you had been comparing certain moments to. You had not heard from them in a long time. Their name appeared on your phone one evening. Your entire body reacted before your mind did. Your hands became cold. Your heart sped up. You stared at the message. It said only, can we talk? Old fear returned instantly. You could have hidden it from your soulmate. You almost did. Not because you wanted secrecy. Because you did not want to create jealousy or drama. Then you remembered the agreement, if something matters, say it. So you sent your soulmate a screenshot. Their chest tightened immediately when they saw the name. They knew enough about your story to understand who it was. Jealousy appeared. Fear too. The old impulse said, tell you not to respond. Protect the connection. But your soulmate stopped. This was the exact moment their growth would either become real or collapse. They wrote, how do you feel seeing that? You stared at the question. Not, are you going to answer? Not, do you still love them? How do you feel? You replied, sick. Angry. Curious. Your soulmate asked, do you want to talk to them? You answered, I don't know. They took time before replying. Whatever you decide, I want it to be because it's right for you, not because you're afraid I'll be upset. That sentence affected you deeply. Because the person from your past had once used jealousy to control your behavior. Your soulmate was doing the opposite. You replied, you're not jealous. They answered honestly, very. That made you smile despite everything. Then, but jealousy doesn't give me the right to make your choice. That was new. Safe. You wrote, I think I need to know why they're reaching out. Your soulmate answered, okay. You asked, are you sure? They wrote, no, then. But I trust you enough to be scared honestly. That sentence stayed with you. You responded to the old person, what do you want? The answer came quickly. I heard you're seeing someone. Your stomach dropped. Your soulmate saw the screenshot and felt their own fear rise. Then another message appeared from the past, I just want to make sure you don't make the same mistake again. You stared. Your soulmate stared. The irony was almost unbearable. The person who had once created the pattern now claiming to protect you from repeating it. You replied, what mistake? Their answer came, trusting someone who knows exactly how to make you feel safe. Your entire body went still. That sentence attacked the very thing you and your soulmate had been discussing. Safety. Trust. The fear that someone could behave beautifully at first and change later. Your soulmate felt anger rise, but they did not lash out. They wrote to you, that feels manipulative. You replied, I know. But the message had already touched the old wound. What if they were right? What if your soulmate was simply better at hiding? Your soulmate sensed the change in your silence. Old instinct could have taken offense. How can you doubt me after everything? Instead they wrote, I know this probably hit exactly where you're scared. Tears filled your eyes. It did. They replied, I can't prove tonight that I'll never change. Honest. But I can keep showing you who I am over time. You stared at that sentence. No impossible promise. No demand for blind trust. Evidence over time. Then they added, and if I ever start becoming inconsistent or controlling, I need you to tell me. Don't protect the relationship from the truth. That mattered. You replied, okay. But your past person was not finished. Another message came, ask them what happened in their last relationship. Your soulmate froze when you sent the screenshot. Something changed in their face. You noticed immediately. What? You asked. Silence. There was something. A chapter they had not yet explained fully. Not necessarily something terrible. But something they had avoided telling you because they were ashamed of how they behaved. And suddenly the entire conflict returned in a new form. Your past had entered the present and pointed directly toward your soulmate's past.